Good morning, everyone. My name is Jared Langlois. I'm the Senior Director of Monitoring, Evaluation, Research, and Learning at DT Global. And I'm here to moderate a session on an integrated approach to bridging participatory research with participatory program design, good practices and case studies from the field. I'm joined today by Dr. Ilke Hustings, who has a PhD in Security, Identity, and Peace Building. She has worked on peace building programs for over the last 15 years. She's currently SEED's head of programs and field operations and has oversaw global research efforts and research and development work on constructive citizenship and economic resilience for the last 6 years. She has also helped to expand SEED's work to Eastern Europe and West Africa, and she currently serves as Director General. We're also joined today by Dr. Yannis Loris, who's the neurophysiologist and system scientist trained in Germany and the US, and he is currently serves as CEO of Future World Center and the head of the New Media Lab and the Futures Design Unit. Dr. Loris' most recent contributions are in reinventing democracy. He has led 16 SSDPs, structured dialogues, aimed to support global youth to identify shortcomings of current systems and governance and propose innovative concrete actions towards reinventing democracy in the digital era. Alexander Guest is our third panelist, and he has worked over the last decade in population research design, and he's led to key innovations at SEED, where he has improved and at times automated methodological approaches and analytical processes. His thematic specialization has focused on social cohesion, constructive citizenship frameworks. Alex has joined SEED in 2018 as a data analyst and is currently their head of research. Next slide. So why do we need an integrated 4D approach? We all know there's no shortages of global problems or conundrums, yet resources are in short supply. So it is essential that we kind of establish priorities regarding where we focus our attention and energy, what we address first, where, and how we do it. There's no shortage of global problems or conundrums, but as I've said earlier, resources are in short supply. The impact that peace and development architects have, as well as the efforts they put forward, are hampered by weak evidence base and a lack of meaningful participation in formulation of evidence and interventions. Participatory processes, such as the ones we will discuss today, are sophisticated analytical toolkits and collaboration decision-making. And the procedures we use should be combined in with research and program design methodology. This will allow evidence to be digested and translated into the interventions that are both effective and tailored to specific locations. I'm going to turn it over to Ilke, who's going to walk through a little bit more specifics about the 4D approach and then present our first case study, followed by Dr. Yannis' presentation of the second case study and step 2, and finally the third step in the process will be touched on by Alexander Guest. Over to you, okay.
Thank you, Jared. Everyone can hear me well? Great. Well, let me start with the big picture of this integrated 4D approach, or we're calling it the 4D approach. It's discovery, deliberation, deployment, and development. We had really busy, stimulating, interesting past couple of days at PeaceCon, and a lot of the sessions we hear similar themes about importance of localization, importance of participatory processes, and meaningfully participatory processes, and how we integrate good evidence into our interventions, our work, our policies and programs. And a lot of the times we've got good evidence, but we don't have the time to integrate it or synthesize it. Sometimes we don't have good evidence because of the challenges that we face. And we deploy and invest in programs without feeling sure that the evidence is robust. And sometimes participatory processes are not meaningful or, again, not well organized. So we wanted to present this integrated 4D approach that we believe the whole is bigger than the sum of its parts, that it needs to come together in a holistic way and provide a framework that bridges research with impactful program design. So in the first stage is discovery, is robust population research, where we create the evidence, where we map the challenges to understand the social cohesion dynamics, peace building, development dynamics, fractures, resilience capacities, and other fragility factors in the context that we're working. In the second stage of deliberation, we create a roadmap of interventions that can transform the challenges using the evidence from stage one. So this program design intervention is deliberation, puts the right people in the room and devises a roadmap of what to do with the evidence. When we move to stage three, deployment. Deployment is about piloting and learning about the interventions that we've deliberated on, operationalize it, and selects cross-section of interventions that are sequenced in the roadmap, and tests and learns before bigger investments and bigger resources are invested. It creates counterfactual impact assessments to make sure that these pilots and these interventions are indeed transformative, that the research was good and robust, that the deliberation was on point and evidence-based, and the roadmap and the interventions by the roadmap are implemented, the protocols are working, before we go and invest and scale up these interventions in stage 4, where we adapt, expand, and develop further. In the session, our session is built on these each of these stages, as Gerard mentioned. And there is, of course, a feedback loop between all of these stages. It's like a snakes and ladders game. The scale up might be to the neighboring community with small refinements and small adaptations. So we need a feedback loop with stage 3 to understand the pilot, to refine the pilot and understand our counterfactual impact. Scale up may need more adaptation because it's going nationwide. It's not going to the next community, but nationwide, or to a slightly different group. Or maybe our counterfactual impact assessments have not produced convincing results. Therefore, we might need to loop back to stage 2, to our deliberation, and revisit our roadmap. Or enough time has passed, or there has been a drastic change in the context, and therefore we need to loop back to the stage 1 and recalibrate and fine-tune our research and evidence that we've that started the process. In this 4D approach, while stage 1 looks at the challenge on the societal level, stage 3 looks at whether the intervention worked at the community, at the participant level. So there's evidence creation in each of these stages, but they are at different levels. So it's a very multi-level 4D approach. For each of the stages, we'll present a methodology that we believe is a gold standard, but it's not the only methodology that can be used to implement that stage. But it's a methodology methodologies that we have tested, used, and we believe are good methodologies that can answer multiple challenges, and illustrate how these methodologies work with case studies from Ukraine, Cyprus, and Rwanda. So again, these methodologies are not exclusive, or there might be others that are gold standard, silver standard, bronze, or that are available. But we think what's important here is that to find the appropriate methodology and make sure that all 4 stages come together to bridge research with programming. We also identified guiding principles of the integrated 4D approach, that each of the 4 stages need to uphold some guiding principles. Each of the 4 stages need to be inclusive and participatory in the methodology and in the process that they adopt. Inclusive and participatory, the way they design research frameworks, the way they design indicators, the way they design programs, it's vital for ownership, impact, collective wisdom, and sustainability. And this helps with localization and meaningful participation. Each of the stages from discovery to development also need to be contextually sensitive and locally calibrated. While research and indices it's important to be comparable on a global stage sometimes, when it comes to program design, bridging research with program design is not as effective unless our research is very contextually sensitive and locally calibrated. So it's not the way we measure happiness in Nepal is not going to be the way we measure happiness in Ukraine or another indicator. So we need to make sure that do no harm principles upheld, evidence and programs and policies are conflict sensitive and relevant and responsive. So these are kind of common guiding principles, but I think the important point is that each of the stages need to make sure that they have considered how their methodologies and processes uphold these. The third principle is intersectoral and interdisciplinary approaches. It's vital to build a holistic, multidimensional understanding of how different domains affect each other when we're doing our research, when we are designing our programs, when we are understanding the impact and then the counterfactual evidence of our programs, and when we're scaling up. And what I mean by interdisciplinary and holistic multidimensional understanding is that we need to make sure that even if our focus is on gender equality or climate, we need to understand how different domains influence each other, from psychosocial functioning to human security to institutional development. Because to make meaning out of the chaos and the complexity of life, and especially life in conflict and post-conflict environment, it's really important to understand the interrelationships. And lastly, the fourth principle is evidence-based and scientific approaches that are not based on expert assumptions and intuition or habitual practices or anecdotal evidence, but are methodologically robust and empirically validated. So we can create theories of change that we can empirically validate and use sophisticated scientific evidence. So I'll present stage one, the discovery population research stage. This is one of the strengths of SEED, Center for Sustainable Peace and Democratic Dialogue, and our methodology that is called SCORE, Social Cohesion and Reconciliation Index. What we try to do with this methodology is to address three challenges that also speak to the principles we've discussed: lack of inclusion and participation, narrow scope, and not being sufficiently evidence-driven when we do population research. There are many, these challenges are not unsurmountable. These challenges don't necessarily all exist at once for everyone, different actors and different methodologies. And there are other methodologies that can answer these challenges as well. However, we believe that the SCORE methodology can answer all three of them and answer them well. And it provides us a good tool to work with, and a good versatile calibratable tool. So in different instances, peace and development actors may be diligently evidence-driven, but evidence might not be produced using participatory means. Or a methodology may be participatory and multidisciplinary, but the evidence may not be contextually calibrated enough. This is not to say that the interventions, again, need to be all multidisciplinary and do all of these things at once, because we realize that this is also a luxury. A lot of the times we are short with resources, particularly time, energy, and human resources as well, and not only financial resources, and we need to respond fast. But it's important that we understand the consequences and interrelationships of interventions. For instance, going back to being multidisciplinary to ensure that we can address the challenge 2 and challenge 3, it's important, for instance, if we were to do an infrastructural intervention that builds new road networks to improve interregional trade and improve economic security between certain regions in a country, then we need to understand how the infrastructural intervention is interlinked with law enforcement, as crime would travel along those roads as well. Or how social tolerance, investing in social tolerance, could also lead to disruptive behaviors in certain contexts. So we really need to understand the interlinks between domains. So this is the process framework of this our 4D approach, where it starts with consultation with stakeholders for the discovery phase, and develops conceptual maps, understands the concepts that we need to measure, that we need to quantify, and before we design the research framework. This then leads to selection of measurement instruments, sample design, data collection, statistical analysis. And the most important thing in this process framework is that it upholds the principle one, inclusivity and participation, because the conceptual mapping and selection of measurements and instruments and design of indicators happen in a consultative way, be it multi-stakeholder workshops and focus groups, especially outside of capital, to make sure that there is diversity of voices when we try to understand and map the snapshot of a country. And it ensures this inclusivity and participatory of duty bearers as well as right holders. A lot of the times in research, we might see that participation and inclusion comes towards the end of research when we are ready to share the data and make meaning and interpret the data. But in SCORE, it's built throughout the process and from the start. One of the key things that we do in SCORE, for instance, is that we establish a core reflection group, a multi-partner steering committee made up of different actors and stakeholders, duty bearers and right holders, that will shape the research to make sure it is responsive, localized, and contextually driven. And this means that the research itself or the methodology becomes a convening and coalition building approach as well. It builds that convening, coalition building power, and it goes beyond evidence creation. It creates an opportunity, a concrete collaboration opportunity between different actors. It creates a shared evidence source for these actors, and a common vocabulary to work with different indicators. So it helps coordination of interventions, donors, and implementing partners easier. In Ukraine, for instance, SCORE was initiated in 2016 on the national level with OTI, and in the eastern part of the country with UNDP. But then SCORE convened different, it became the main shared evidence source and built a wide-reaching coalition that combined USAID, UNICEF, IOM, FCGO, EU, and national actors, particular ministries, and local actors and experts and sociologists in the country. And that evidence became integrated and a common evidence source that was empowering and ensures that there's ownership of that evidence and what we do and how we understand and use the implications of that evidence. The SCORE content framework is also interdisciplinary and intersectional. It basically looks at a wide range of library of indicators designed and tested in multiple contexts, from Ukraine to Nepal, from Liberia to Afghanistan, and calibrates each of these indicators when it goes to a new context to make sure that they are spot on. We didn't have a Soviet nostalgia indicator until we rolled out SCORE in Eastern Europe and Caucasus. We didn't have a political tribalism indicator until we rolled it out in West Africa. So new indicators emerge in SCORE through these consultative mechanisms as well. And this is how we look at the interrelationships between different domains by organizing them in these from human security to human capability, and then doing advanced analysis to understand how they can interweave and help us understand the multidimensional domains and investigate the root causes, the drivers of desirable outcomes, to take us beyond frequencies and take us beyond description of a situation, of a challenge, of problem, but to how we can transform it, to understand the resilience capacities, the fragility factors, and the drivers that can transform it. SCORE also comes with a scientifically robust a toolkit, analysis toolkit, advanced statistical toolkit that provides diagnostic and predictive evidence that investigates societal vulnerabilities and upholds the principles as well. I will speed past this because I think it's important to illustrate what it can do rather than talk about it theoretically. So SCORE can help us answer what, where, and how. We can answer what by using SCORE to build, understand abstract concepts, in this case, social cohesion in Ukraine. We can build SCORE to identify the elements of social cohesion in Ukraine, which might be different than in other countries, and see where our attention is needed, what needs our attention. In this case, SCORE 2021, we looked at different indicators that can make up vertical social cohesion in Ukraine and horizontal social cohesion. Vertical social cohesion, we looked at political security, sense of agency, accountability of authorities, Ukrainian authorities' care, and compound this into a meta-indicator of vertical social cohesion. Similarly with horizontal social cohesion. And what goes into these baskets of vertical and horizontal social cohesion was done with national stakeholders and calibrated to the context of Ukraine. Here, when we look at this picture, what is high, what is low, what needs our attention, we can see that vertical social cohesion needs more attention than horizontal. Accountability of authorities and Ukrainian authorities' care, the sense of neglect and sense of care are low. These are scores out of 10. So if 0 meant nobody thinks that authorities care and none of the authorities are accountable, and 10 means everybody absolutely sure that authorities are accountable and they care for different parts of Ukraine and their citizens. We can also see over time how these have changed. In 2022, after the war, we see that the vertical cohesion in Ukraine has significantly increased. Sense of agency and authorities' care scores have skyrocketed after the war. We also see significant increases in horizontal social cohesion. Social tolerance, community cooperation, pluralistic Ukrainian identity, sense of belonging to the country, these two have skyrocketed. In this picture, we can see that not only the different elements of social cohesion that can give us the what needs our attention, but how things are changing, dynamics are changing over time in response to stressors, in response to developments. In 2022, we see social cohesion has enormously improved, and maybe instead of trying to understand how we can improve it further, we need to understand how we can maintain it so that it doesn't turn into fatigue and it doesn't turn into apathy or disillusionment. SCORE can also help us answer where, so we can go a level deeper. Now that we know what needs our attention, if it was sense of civic duty or civic agency because it was low, we can look at a heat map and see where it needs our attention. Is it a nationwide problem or is it a localized problem? And that can give us an indication of some areas in the country that are significantly below the national score that might feel left behind or need further attention, maybe qualitative studies to further understand why we are seeing what we are seeing. It basically helps us prioritize and zoom in. In 2022, we see that the geographic variances have disappeared, and we see the scores have increased a lot. So again, it tells us that we don't need to work to increase things further in certain locations, but we need to understand how we can maintain the situation. And that way, SCORE can tell us the how. So we looked at the what, the where, and now we can look at the how. The how is done through modeling and looking at these interrelationships between hundreds of indicators that SCORE measures and understanding the drivers. If we wanted to maintain sense of agency and civic responsibility, so civic duty, because it has been improved after the war, and we want to maintain it, we then look at the drivers of that. Human security, social connectedness, and community cooperation are the drivers where we need to work to make sure that these drivers and these factors are improving and maintained and therefore we can maintain it on the sense of agency and civic responsibility level. You can also see the scores here, so we can see which driver we need to focus on. Social connectedness, a score of 6.8 out of 10. Maybe that's not where we focus our attention, but we focus our attention on human security because it is 5 out of 10. And then we can take this and look at a heat map again and zoom in further and understand which geography needs human security interventions and what human security elements, and keep peeling the indicators and score like an onion and give us very good, robust, tailored evidence to create and identify where our impact is more likely. We can also see kind of on the outcome level that sense of agency and civic responsibility are working on these indicators, working on these drivers to maintain these indicators would also help us increase and contribute to progressive EU orientation. There is an outcome level. And we can build these models for different theories of change and different outcomes of interest. I think I'm going to stop here. This kind of concludes and illustrates how we can use the stage 1 discovery population research stage to create good, robust evidence. But this evidence does not give us interventions yet, does not give us a roadmap. It gives us a snapshot of the situation and helps us map the challenges. How do we take this further and design good programs? I will pass the microphone to Dr. Yannis Laurus. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilke. I don't need this slide. You can go to the next one. All right, we're going to change gears. Ironically, what I will be talking about is another kind of science, and we call it people's science. So it's a science that empowers the actual people to act as scientists, actually as systems scientists, without being trained or without having the need to know all the theory behind it. Because at the end of the day, it's people who are going to make the change. It's actual people on the ground who need to take decisions. They need to envision where they want to go. They really need to understand what the problem is, and they need to understand what the obstacles are. They need to design actions and implement those actions. So we need to mobilize people. But for people to come together, they need to talk. And guess what? We don't have a science of talking. We all know that when you bring more than 2 people in the same room and they start talking, they lose focus. They talk at the same time. They don't listen to each other. And they rarely reach conclusions. People have their stereotypes. They have different interests, perspectives. They really want to dominate the discussion or serve their own agendas. So there are many, many problems that we have when we bring people in the room. And I will only focus on a few of them. The first problem we have is focus. So when you bring, no, stay on that the previous. Focus. So when we bring people in the room and we tell them, or they agree to discuss something, do they stay on that subject or do they move around? I mean, we all witness every night on television when the journalist brings some politicians on her program to talk about something, but they talk about something else. So there is no focus. So when we bring people in a room to discuss anything, we need to have a methodology that forces them to stay on the subject. And that's one of the things that the methodology that I am pitching for is doing. The second is active listening. In our everyday life, we all witness the fact that we are not really listening what the other person is saying. We are listening only to the extent how to attack or how to debate. We don't deliberate, we debate. We speak at the same time. And also, people talk too much and it's overwhelming sometimes because we don't remember what they say. And by the time they finish what they want to say, maybe we forgot what they said. So active listening needs structure again. needs to be conducted in an environment where you bring the people in a situation where they are relaxed and they are also forced to listen to the others, because there is a strict facilitator who controls the order by which everybody is talking. The third problem is that we don't use systems thinking. I just realized that the slide there has wrong content, but I will explain it. Systems thinking means that we are very linear in our thinking. We think that everything is causal. There is a cause and there is an effect, and we can figure it out. But this is not how life works. Especially today, the problems that humanity faces are far too complex. There are too many parameters involved, and it's almost impossible to predict when you change one parameter, how something else is going to change. We call it a complex system. And to solve a complex system, you need complexity science. There is a whole new science that helps us solve such problems. The other point is that when you bring people in the room to discuss about something, let's say to solve a problem or to take some actions or decide for some actions for their country, for their community, are you really bringing the right people? And who are the right people? We have a definition. The right people are those who have pain. Everybody who has pain about the situation is the right people. So this means the actual people on the ground, they are the most important actors, and the experts are secondary. The primary actors are the lay people, the normal people. However, because they might not be equipped with the knowledge to participate in difficult dialogues, we need to give them those weapons. We need to empower them with the methodology that puts them in the center. And that's what structured democratic dialogue does. And it needs to be participatory in the sense that everybody is equal and nobody can overwhelm and take over the discussion, or it's not about voting, because this idea that democracy is based on one person, one vote is all wrong. We know it, because voting can be manipulated. It's something else we're talking about here. Participation is about designing a space where everybody has equal opportunity to speak, but also equal opportunity to be heard, and their opinion are equal on the ground. So there is this methodology that allows us to do that. And I talked a little bit about complexity when I was talking about systems. So let's go to the next slide. I only have 3 slides, guys, so don't worry about it. So we are following this model. Something is missing from this slide. Is there another part? Okay, all right. Okay, so the current situation is where we are now. And in the classical approaches of analysis is that we try to understand all the parameters of the situation where we are now. But guess what? One of the first rules of system science is that even if you solve all the problems that you have now, you will not solve the big problem of the system. You are going to just be in an extrapolated future, similarly problematic, because the problems are interrelated. By solving one problem, you might be creating another one. So this is why it is very important before you talk about the problems, you need to know where you want to go. You need to have a vision. You need to have a consensual vision. You need to bring the people in the room, or multiple people, or you have to do it many times, different groups, to develop a real shared vision where they all would like to be in X years from today. And even if you have enemies in the room, they are usually enemies today, but they all mean good, or most of them mean good. I mean, they all want the best in the future. They all want to have happy life. They all want to stay alive. They all want a better future for their children. So in the future, we have less differences. In the present, we have a lot of differences. So by shifting the discussion in the future and designing, constructing a model of the future, this model serves as an attractor, as a magnet, and drives us to go there. And once we develop that, then it's easier to understand what are the obstacles, what are the things that prevent us from reaching that future. And we call it the wall of obstacles. And then you can design actions that will put that wall down. But you know what? You need to know how to destroy the bricks at the bottom of that wall. It doesn't have any meaning to destroy the problems at the top of that wall. You want to put the building down, so you need to start from the root. So that's why you need root causes. You need to find the root causes. And I don't have sufficient time. Next slide, Ilke. I don't have sufficient time to talk about the methodology in detail. The methodology is called structured dialogic design. A process is called structured democratic dialogue. You can Google it and you can find many books and many publications that have been developed. Our team is one of the strongest teams in the world, but we are not the only ones. There are teams all over the planet that are working with this methodology, and hopefully some of you will join. It's a methodology that is grounded on system science. It has some laws of system science that is very mathematical in the background, but in the surface it's very simple. There is a process which you just follow and it's always successful. And these are the stages, and I will go through them very quickly. The first stage is that before you bring people in the room, you have to decide, of course, who are the people. You have to select the right people. You have to choose them respecting what we call requisite variety. So it's not only one word, inclusivity. There are many techniques on how you choose the right people in the room so that they represent the real society out there. So you have to include not only the simple things like male, female, ages, youth, and so on, but opposite interests, levels of power, and so on. And there are explanations how you do this selection of stakeholders. The second challenge, that's even before my slide. The second challenge is that you focus the discussion by formulating a triggering question. So you have one question that is your actual problem, that the thing you want to solve, or the dream you want to design. So there is a little question. And everybody has to provide responses. That's now the idea generation, the second image there. Everybody has to provide a response to that. Like, for example, we say in Cyprus, because I'm Cypriot, and we have Turkish side and Greek Cypriot side, and we want to reunite or live together one day. And we can ask the question, what are the obstacles that prevent us? And everybody can say something. And of course, they disagree completely, but it doesn't matter. We just write those titles. They can say that it's the fault of the British, it's the fault of the nationalists, is this, is that. I mean, we collect 100 ideas. But you know, when somebody says something, we understand maybe not exactly what that person wanted to say, because we have stereotypes in our mind. So we need to go to the next phase, which is the clarification, because we have the title, but then we have the clarification of that idea. Then we group them. I'm not going to go into detail on that. And then people can also vote. We can give them, let's say, 5 stickers, and there are 100 ideas, and say, if you could only solve 5 problems, which 5 would you prioritize? And guess what? After a few hours of doing this workshop, if the production was like 100 ideas, let's say 20 people produced 100 ideas, every person 5 ideas, only half of the ideas receive votes. Even though every person has sufficient stickers to choose their own proposals, obviously they don't choose them. Only half of the ideas that have been produced receive any vote at all. And from this half, only half receive more than 1 sticker, which means that through this methodology, we are able to produce a wide spectrum of ideas, but then compress it into about 1/4 by consensus. And then we take that 1/4 and do our miracle. And I'm pretty sure you have heard everything I said until now. Different other methodologies have similar approaches to that. But I bet that what I will explain now, maybe nobody in the room knows about it unless you are involved in this methodology. It's called structural modeling. The idea is that you take those proposals that made it to this stage, 2 at a time. So the software, you need a software, will choose like 2 ideas and put them on the wall, like on a projector, and open a discussion among the participants whether destroying this obstacle will help us destroy the other obstacle. So we are not talking about which obstacle is worse, we are talking about a relationship. So we are moving away from the positions that people have into the relationships. And by these pairwise discussions, we built a map. So there is like an influence map. Jump to the next slide, please, Ilke. We cannot really read it in detail, but this is at the bottom of the map are the worst obstacles, let's say. That's an example from Cyprus about peace, how to reunify the island. And the ideas at the bottom are worsening the ideas that are higher and so on. And when people, and every time when people discuss, they take a vote, and only if 75% see a relationship, we pass it. Because of that, this map reflects a very high level of consensus. So they all recognize this map as their own, even though they enter the room with huge different opinions and conflicts, they come to an agreement of how things are related. And they understand what are the worst problems that they need to address first, because they are at the root. And they also understand that what they thought was a very big problem might be a big problem, but there is no leverage to touch it. And that's the wonders that this methodology makes. And because these people who have different opinions, they come to a consensus and they all take this map home. They say, this is my map. You understand that they become like brothers now to make it happen. So it creates a momentum for change. So we have done this in a few countries and also globally for the project, where we multiplied the same process almost simultaneously in different locations in the country. And this creates a momentum, a simultaneous momentum for change. The best example is one in Cyprus for the reform of local authorities, which the government wanted to impose, the people didn't want it. But by engaging the actual people on the ground and letting them decide what is best for them, they came to a consensus which was almost the same like the government wanted to do. But because the government wanted to do, they didn't want it. But when they developed it and they discovered themselves that it was the best for them, they went for it, and it happened. So I will give the word back to Ilke and I guess to Alexander. Sorry, that's like a summary here. That because they are in the room together and they talk, they develop a shared language. And they understand the problem in the same way. They have the shared knowledge. I mean, the knowledge, they come in the room with a few ideas of their own, but they leave the room with the total knowledge of the group. They agree on a concrete strategy and action plan, and they are motivated to move forward with actions. Thank you.
Thanks, Yanni. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name is Alex Guest. I'm going to talk to you about the next stage in this process that Ilke began and Yannis continued. And the stage we're talking about is deploy. And at this stage, we can assume that already some kind of collection of a robust evidence basis with something like the SCORE has been done, followed by an in-depth participatory dialogue process like the one that Yannis has outlined, and now is that has led to the creation of a series of policies, protocols, programs that we are poised to deploy in the community or in the country or in the society that we want to build peace in or intervene to resolve challenges that are faced. But what are the challenges that we need to think about at this stage, where we have the design or the detailed design of a policy or a program that we want to implement, but some things are still not clear. One of the big challenges that people in our field face is a lack of understanding of the effect, of the potential effect of the intervention that we are poised to deploy. It may be something that hasn't been done before. It may be something that's been done elsewhere, but not in the community that we're intervening, or the contexts that we're facing are fluid enough such that we're not sure that it's still something relevant. Another big challenge is the difficulty of disentangling the effects that we hope to get from the intervention that we're intervening from other societal dynamics that we know are happening. So it may well be the case that a strategy, a policy, a program, an intervention that has been designed will have an effect, but that we still are not quite sure if the society or the community would have resolved the problem by itself anyway. So that's one of the challenges that come into play when we're poised to deploy these interventions. And finally, because we don't have a full understanding sometimes of precisely what the mid or long-term impacts of the interventions that we're intervening have, there might be do no harm issues. There might be ethical issues about intervening without knowing the true impact of what we're doing. So these are challenges that people who are involved in interventions and implementation of interventions should be scratching their heads about and are scratching their heads about just before deployment. And the right thing to do at this point before scaling up is to do a randomized controlled trial. This is as I've outlined already, we've kind of assuming that we've already done a kind of a SCORE-like multidimensional study that gives us an evidence basis, and it gives us a kind of bird's eye view of the challenges that the country is facing. It talked about the where, the what, and the why. That evidence can help support an SDDP-like participatory dialogue process to actually devise the process that needs to be implemented, but also to convene a group which will actually design protocols to be implemented in an intervention. So that's where we go in. But the next step would then be to do a small-scale pilot of the intervention, whatever the intervention might be, to ensure that it works. And the benefits of doing something like this is also to make sure that the plan is feasible, the intervention is feasible. So a feasibility assessment is important. Also to gauge the acceptability of the intervention that we're planning in the local community that we're doing in with the participants and with the stakeholders. And also as a last chance to make improvements. So that's why you need to do a small-scale pilot with a small set of individuals or communities that are going to receive the intervention. It's really important when doing RCTs to screen individuals or screen communities. That means doing some kind of assessment to ensure that the people who are going to receive this intervention, or the community that is going to receive the intervention, are the appropriate people and community to receive it. So if the intervention, for example, is focusing on reducing food insecurity, communities should be screened such that food security is actually a problem in their community, and intervening in that way would ameliorate the situation. And then this is one of the principles of the randomized controlled trial. This is the R in RCTs. You randomly allocate those who you've screened to be eligible to either be participants of the intervention in its first wave, or to go to a waiting list where they'll receive the intervention at a later stage. The reason for doing this randomization into two groups, this is having a control group, is so that at a later point, when you do your comparison of the baseline and the end line of the group that received the intervention and the group that didn't receive the intervention, group being, the community or the individual who received it and who didn't receive it, that will give you evidence that addresses some of the challenges that I spoke about earlier. So it will help us disentangle the effect of the intervention from other societal dynamics. So did the intervention that was supposed to resolve food insecurity issues have a much stronger effect among those communities who received the intervention compared to those who didn't? Did it solve the problem in one group and not the other? And of course, what you need to do as part of doing an RCT is measuring the same key outcomes before, during, and after the intervention. So these very brief points here that I've mentioned are the skeleton of doing an RCT. Of course, different flavors of RCTs exist that can be compared on all kinds of different characteristics, but this is the skeleton of it. And why are they really important? What are their benefits? Well, firstly, they can provide evidence of causality unequivocally, whereas other forms of evidence, even pre-post baseline end-line surveys, don't always produce strong evidence of causality. They minimize biases and confounding factors. They can help us inform the policies and the interventions that we're doing, and also inform and contribute to the global knowledge base. If an intervention is done with a randomized controlled trial, that is extremely strong evidence to suggest that it should be rolled out, definitely within similar contexts, but even should be considered as a gold standard best practice to be implemented globally. So SEED has been designing the statistical methods and the technical methodologies needed to do an RCT in Rwanda, where the intervention was around healing families, communities, and individuals affected by the genocide against the Tutsis. And this project is the implementation of these healing groups is done by an organization called Interpeace, who have also convened a group of local Rwandan NGOs, CSOs, and academics to implement these interventions. And one of the findings that the studies that we've been doing in collaboration with Interpeace and the other local organizations has found are shown here. We have found the intervention has been successful in massive reduction in mental health issues, 64% reduction in depression, similar scores of reduction in anxiety and trauma. It's also been effective in peace building in local communities, with massive increases in things like forgiveness and attempts by people to resolve their differences, their grievances stemming from violence in the past. But also the intervention was successful in reducing extreme poverty, a 40% decrease in extreme poverty. And this is where we see that the importance of interdisciplinary and multidimensional aspects of the work that is being done. And Interpeace and others have I applaud the work that they've done in bringing together three dimensions of peace building work together under one multi-sectoral intervention, and that chimes in with the principles, with one of the principles that Ilke mentioned at the beginning of her presentation on the necessity of being multidimensional. So this evidence is amazing, right? A 40% decrease in extreme poverty when you bring families and individuals together to do peace building and mental health and healing. And there's a but coming, which is that this evidence is not actually from an RCT. It's from a pre-post study with participants of the intervention. And of course, that is strong evidence to suggest that something is going really, really well in this intervention, which necessitates then the next step of the process, beyond going a pre-post survey on the pilot, is to do an RCT to underline and to iron cast this evidence such that it can be mainstreamed international policy of Rwanda, but also that it can inform the design of other peace-building mental health and livelihoods interventions elsewhere. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. These are definitely extraordinary claims, and that's why decision was made to do an RCT to track the effect of this intervention in a new intake of individuals. And once that's done, this data will be a lot more robust, because someone who is feeling particularly cynical could, for example, observe that Rwanda has reported some of the highest growth rates over the past years, something like between 6 and 9% in most of the years of the last decades growth. So one would actually expect to see a large decrease in extreme poverty. So what was the percentage of people who didn't receive this intervention? What was the reduction in extreme poverty among those who didn't participate in these sociotherapy and collaborative livelihoods activities that I'm talking about? Only by doing an RCT and by controlling similar groups of people who received and who didn't receive this intervention can we confidently say that this is a policy that, for example, should be mainstreamed into national policy of Rwanda, should inform program design in other countries, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. Thanks a lot. So here are some of the principles of RCTs for our field, for the development and peace building field. These principles might differ from best principles used in research design of RCTs in academia or in other sciences, and that's one of the interesting tensions between principles of peace building and gold standards of peace building and of science, and that's a creative, interesting tension. One of these principles that we believe is really central and really important is local ownership and agency. So local organizations should design and implement the study and the intervention. And on the side of this slide, you can see us giving a workshop with local organizations and our partners at Interpeace in Rwanda, where we worked together with them to design the study, to collect the data, to analyze it, and to interpret the results of the data as well. It's also really important to build a coalition, and Interpeace has done this masterfully. This is not something that I can take credit for. This is something that Interpeace should fully take credit for, in terms of building a wide array of civil society organizations, but also national governmental organizations and civil society as well, such that this kind of societal transformational work can be handed over to be sustainable by local civil society. The next principle is the importance of training and learning. So we hope that at some point the level of learning and training of our local partners will reach the level of maturity such that they will be influencing global policy and push the research frontier. Indeed, we're giving the pen over to some of our local partners to write academic papers based on the results of the RCT, which is data for which is being collected as we speak. And it's also really important, this chimes in with one of the principles that Yannis mentioned, is the inclusion of the affected, right? So the people who you see in that photo, the people who are participating at all levels in this RCT, are people who have actually been affected by the problem that the intervention which is being checked by the RCT is trying to solve, right? So all of these people are have been affected to some extent by the genocide. This is one of the principles that is probably not in harmony with the principles of doing RCTs in academia, in the medical field, for example, or in other branches of psychology. So ensuring that these principles are upheld maximizes impact, of course. It ensures that we've got contextual sensitivity. It ensures that all the work that we're doing is sustainable. And it also increases the likelihood that what is being done is going to be integrated into national policy, that's going to be taken forward. And it also will increases the likelihood of it influencing global policy, regional policy, and work elsewhere. So finally, just to finish off with some thoughts about where else participatory, locally led RCTs I think might be most needed at this point. To speak in generic terms, RCTs are most needed in contexts that are complex, unknown, evolving, and very specific to the particular geography that we're interested in. So other speakers have spoken about wicked problems. So wicked problems need RCTs because we can consider that wicked problems are new diseases that we need to develop new vaccines for. And when you develop a new vaccine, you need to do a proper RCT rather than just blanket intervene across a community. RCTs are also probably most needed where there is much to gain, but where there is much to lose as well. So there needs to be a sweet spot of where interventions can be really effective, and we need to be sure that what we're doing has an impact. So actually, the example that I gave about food insecurity is probably not a good example of where an RCT needs to be done, because you don't have much to lose in terms of doing an RCT, right? When you have food security issues, it's not worth waiting to intervene. It's better to just intervene. Whereas in other cases where intervening might have a negative effect and you have much to lose by intervening, an RCT and a more thoughtful process is better. RCTs are better placed in areas where some level of stability exists. So RCTs are a gold standard, but gold standard methodologies are often a bit slower and a bit more intensive to implement. And so having a context that you're more or less sure is going to be stable for the next 6, 12, 18 months is probably a better idea, particularly because these studies do need to be longitudinal. And they're also particularly important when consequential decisions are being made. And this is why I stressed in previous slides about integration into policy, national policy. So if there is an opening in a context where a national policy on peace building is going to be designed, or a national educational policy is going to be designed, or a mental health policy is going to be designed, those decisions are made once every couple of decades in most countries, right? So, but precisely before those decisions are made, an RCT is most needed. Whereas if those decisions are already set in stone, it might not be worth the efforts of doing an RCT. So those are the kind of places, the kind of context, the kind of moments where an RCT might be needed. I'll also talk for a little bit about which themes I think are most need RCTs to be deployed. So when interventions are around violence reduction, de-radicalization, DDR, reintegration, all this kind of stuff, RCTs are most needed here, precisely because these are emerging problems. Not a lot of work has been done on these issues. The territory is virgin, and this is also a context where, or a theme where we have much to lose. Intervening haphazardly on violence reduction issues might, even the best place plans of mice and men off go astray, or whatever the cliche is. And RCT is needed to make sure that we don't actually generate violence with these kind of interventions. So climate change and environmental stresses and their link to conflict and violence is also an emerging trend where RCTs are needed precisely for the same reasons. But also things like empowering and skilling youth or chronically excluded and marginalized groups is somewhere that RCTs are well placed to answer questions around this, as well as integration of various groups like refugees or IDPs while trying to maintain social cohesion. So RCTs are needed here because often communities are very context specific in what are the right opening points and entry points for integration. And if done, assuming best practices from elsewhere, even from similar regions in the same country, that might actually lead to a conflagration or an increase of tensions in that community. So this was an overview, very briefly, of why we think RCTs are the gold standard for this. I'll also just add very, very briefly that the Evidence-Based Policy Act, which was passed by the US government a couple of years ago, does reference key methods that should be used to generate evidence for impact and for policy design. And RCTs is actually the first example listed in the list of methods that should be used. And in the ADS 201.3.2.17, which I'm sure you're extremely familiar with. It's the policy directive for USAID. Also mentions impact evaluations and RCTs as a gold standard for doing precisely the work that I've described here. So I hope it makes sense that that RCTs are a gold standard, and I hope it also makes sense what their place in this process that Ilke has outlined and Yannis has mentioned as well. And I think with that, I'll hand over to you, Ilke, to talk about the next step.
Thank you, Alex. Just a very brief comment, and I'll pass it to Gerard to facilitate the discussion before we run out of time. I think looking back at the scale up, the stages, the 4D stages, I hope it becomes clear to us that why the whole is bigger than the sum of its parts, because not only that each of these stages have their uphold the principles of inclusivity, scientific, contextual, and multidimensional approaches, and provide a gold standard methodology, but they also are approaches that build coalitions and momentum. And that's why when they come together, they can be bigger than the sum of its parts. But of course, we recognize that coming from stage 1 to stage 4 could take 2 to 3 years. But also recognizing that how much we invest in stage 4, how much we actually invest in scaling up and interventions. And it's really important for us to also proportionally invest in previous stages where, of course, the contexts allow. And like Alex said, in some themes, some areas, humanitarian interventions or food security, we might not have the luxury to build an elongated 4-stage integrated approach. But there are a lot of cases, themes, and contexts that we actually can. Over to you, Gerard.
Thank you very much, Ilke. I would like to turn the focus to our participants and attendees and ask, have you used any of these? How do you use evidence in your programming to base your programming decisions, to help refine the scope of your program, to define it at all, or to scale up, or to help with deployment? Are there any sort of techniques, methodologies, or lessons you have from using evidence in your programming? No? Okay, so everyone's quite silent. Yes, of course you can just type in the chat. If you would have any questions that you would like to ask the presenters, please do type them in the chat, but we would like to focus mostly on some lessons that you have that you have used any of these methodologies or other methodologies to sort of refine the scope of your program and how you've used evidence. I'm also monitoring the chat at the same time, so if there's information in there.
There is a big group of people. It'd be great if you're able to switch your cameras on, so we can see your faces.
So for those of you who don't know, SEED has been used multiple times throughout various contexts, included a couple of times in over the last, I would say, almost decade in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Cyprus, Nepal, Liberia, Ukraine, Moldova, Ivory Coast, Armenia, and others. I highly recommend checking out their work and what they have done, and looking to see like how it could be applicable in terms of like discovering your own context and where you work. Bahar, yes, Bahar is outcome harvesting and contribution of impact and ripple effect mapping within cluster reviews. Yeah, so that I would say is outcome harvesting is bringing it back to like USAID. Then the USAID focus is kind of one of the primary complexity aware monitoring and evaluation and learning tools that is USAID likes to discuss and use a lot in its programming. Outcome harvesting does give you a lot of great evidence as you learn about your program and refine the scope. It can help you in the discovery phase to learn sort of what outcomes are materializing through the effects you're having. It can help you through your deliberation stage, as well as you deploy and use that evidence to build and design counterfactual studies such as RCTs or propensity score matching. Yeah. anyone else have any other times they have used any of these stages or methodologies in their work to inform the programming and to build on evidence base?
Hi, Jared and everyone. Can I just
Yes, of course. Hi,
sorry,
Bahar.
I didn't know where to raise my hand. I
That's
forgot the
okay.
function. I really like the stages, and I took also some notes that I might follow up, and I already sent you an email. So I think for OTI programming, because I work in an OTI program, those 4 stages, it happens in different 4 times sometimes. But sometimes when we do cluster reviews, program objective evaluation, we can use them all. However, one thing that we do is more qualitative, informal discussions with partners, and then with the community, then with our team before that and after that, and then clarifying the domains of change and having a feedback loop, not just within our team to tell them about the impact and do the necessary adaptation, but also to our partners recently. So one thing that we have done right now, we created a mail hub of partners, and we collect the data with them. And then when we finalize the data collection and we do the analysis, we do also participatory analysis. Then we do a program adaptation and learning meeting with them. So we talk to the partners and say, look, these are the results, and this is how they can use it in their activities and strategies. So it's not just our strategy that adapts, and it's not just our team that learns, and our partners as well. So it's not just an activity or grants level, but also like strategic level, how the partners can have some of those ideas and implement them strategically. Because so many of our partners or grantees, they are local organizations that might not have the resources, the time, also the skills to do evaluation for themselves in a strategic level. But giving them the data and the opportunity to analyze it jointly with us, it also helps them how they can integrate those to their strategies and do better programming for their area.
Thank you for that.
Thanks.
Would any of the panelists like to respond?
Yeah, thank you for that comment, Bahar. I think what's important is that it sounds like you're using a similar process, but adapting it to the needs of what your program has. I think one of the points worth keeping in mind is this idea of counterfactual effects. So to the extent that you're doing some of this monitoring, comparing with groups or with individuals that haven't received your interventions to show that there is a difference between participants and non-participants, so that you kind of disambiguate and distinguish the impact of the work that you're doing compared to things that are happening in society at large, that means that the process is being upheld. So to the extent that that is part of a part of your frameworks, then it's absolutely robust evidence that should be shared, not just with your partners and with your organization, but with the world as well.
I really love that comment, Alex, and this is something that we always consider. Right now, we also consider it in the nationally. It's not the locations only that we work in, so we see comparison of participant and non-participant, but if the locations that we are working on generally progressing nationwide. So we do some of those analysis as well. So we see actually, okay, the country in different locations progress in a way, and what's the difference between them and the locations that we work in, and having the evidence and the reasons for that, so we know, is there like unique challenge, is there like unique opportunities for us to chime in, the context and how it's developed. So we do that as well. But thank you so much for the comment.
There is a question in the chat about particular parts of the SCORE framework that are most important to focus on if local partners did not have a high research capacity. I think there is how to answer it. SCORE could be scaled down, scaled down to a community, so it does not necessarily have to be nationwide. The research framework, what's important is that it is consultative and inclusive when we're mapping the indicators and mapping, doing the conceptual mapping to design the research framework. So that can be scaled down all the way down to the city level if needed to be. We were at once also discussing how we can do urban scores in a given city. In Ukraine, we do have city boosters where we have a score in a singular city. We can also scale SCORE up to the regional level. In the Caribbean, Alex is working on a regional score for the English speaking Caribbean. So there is something that we can do if the research capacity and time is limited to scale it down geographically, regionally, sample size, etc. And maintaining the consultative inclusive element of conceptual mapping. There is, of course, another element that can be done if research capacity is very limited and collecting primary data, household data through randomized samples and representative data is difficult. What can be done is that once the inclusive consultative conceptual maps are ready, those maps can guide desk research so that we know how to utilize existing data sets. We don't necessarily have to create new data sets to run through the SCORE cycle. We can use the principles and the conceptual frameworks and the process framework to use existing data that is available to us if we've got the conceptual map and to pull that data together. We might not be able to do predictive modeling, but it would still give us a snapshot of the dynamics that need our attention and our focus in the scaled down geography, the context that we're looking at. I hope that helps.
That is very helpful. Okay, thank you very much. I would like to add, I've participated in a few of these consultative processes to develop the SCORE for a couple of programs, and it's quite intense. But I think through that process and through that collaboration and participatory processes, you're able to really get data that is truly useful and evidence that can inform your program in multiple ways over a longer period of time. I will say that. I would like to thank everybody for their time. I know that we're at time and have gone over a little bit. I see Imam's hands up. If the presenters can stick around so that we can talk about anything additional that people would like to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. That sounds good. Is there a question from Iman?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. The sound cut out for a moment, so I wasn't sure what was going on. Here, I'll turn my camera on. Yeah, so I know that we're at time, so I don't want to take over. I was trying to type a question in the chat, and then I decided to jump on this. So in the conversation of gathering data, especially when it comes to these step processes and monitoring and evaluation, the question that is sticking out in my mind is how do you approach situations where you have access to data or you've accumulated data and there are ethical concerns with releasing it? So I can think of a specific example. If it would compromise someone's like background or identity or something like that, and essentially endangering the target group or the individual from whom you've extracted the data. How do you approach situations like that where there might be some of those issues? Like, can you use it in an ethical way? Are there times where you have to say, no, like we have to put this aside, we can't even put it in a report? I know it's very general, but do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously we anonymize all of the data that we collect. So even though we do focus on the individual in a lot of our studies, and we do kind of try to track individual experiences and individual attitudes, we totally anonymize all the data and we don't share that. But a lot of the time we have results in the data of the form ethnic group X really dislikes ethnic group Y, and ethnic group Y is the group that is dominating the local government, right? So sharing that data with local stakeholders, when you know that the local government might then use that data to corroborate certain, let's say, problematic attitudes towards ethnic group X, right? So in those cases, we would not have that as part of our narrative when discussing the data. We would try to couch ethnic differences or ethnic tensions in ways that kind of push the dialogue towards a positive, constructive discussion. That data, we might share it with, more objective stakeholders who might, who don't have a kind of conflict of interest, or who we trust are not going to misuse the data for kind of nefarious purposes. I don't know, Ilke or Yanni, if you've had similar experiences and you want to kind of weigh in on that as well, because it's a massive issue for data for peace building. Or Iman, if you want to, yeah, go ahead.
Mind right now. Iman, please.
Want me to respond?
Yes, you can.
Oh no, that was very helpful, Alexandra. Thank you. I have a little bit of experience with monitoring and evaluation, and this question keeps coming up. But I often think about this in cross-cultural settings, especially when there are language barriers, or informed consent is not assured, and things like that. And so I'm looking at this from a very general perspective, and I don't want to claim to be an expert, but I do wonder how much that informs the work, or especially when there are conflicts of interest, or there are potentially funders who want access to information but may not understand the risks involved on the ground. And so I was just, wanting to maybe get some insight on how do you navigate situations like that. So
one of the things that also help us is that we make sure that the data is collected in close partnership with local enumerators, local implementing partners. For instance, in Ukraine, again, this is the multi-stakeholder process helps us design the data and the sampling strategy, and the local implementing partners who coordinate the enumerators also have input in that process. So we don't treat them as outside subcontractors and vendors that are, they have to do what the questionnaire that we ask them to administer, but there is a lot of input process into the design and the sampling of the research. For instance, some areas, some settlements in Ukraine are not accessible. There are security issues. There is input and back and forth constantly while we're collecting data with the local actors who are on the ground and in the field. We pilot the questionnaire before administering it to make sure that there aren't elements that make respondents feel insecure, that can trigger emotional responses, which could affect the quality of the data that you collect, but also could put the enumerators at risk if they are creating emotional responses in the communities that they're knocking on doors and collecting data in. So there is a lot of back and forth with the implementing partners on the ground. We also train the enumerators before they hit the field. There is an intense 2-day training period where everyone knows how to address the questionnaire, what it means, what are the sensitivities around it, how to respond if there is an emotional trigger and insecurity in the community. And the data collection process is a continuous feedback loop with the partners, because it's not that we press a button and then 3 months later we receive 20,000 people's data. I think we've got a colleague on the line, Katya, who is currently managing the data collection process in Ukraine at the moment of nearly 9,000 people, and it is a very intense period.
thank you so much.
Talking about the structured dialogue, Iman, it's different because the number of participants is very small, usually 25, unless we do multiple events. But there is a whole scientific theory behind it, and I put it in the chat. It's called critical systems theory or heuristics. But in a simple format, it's 12 questions that you have to ask yourself in order to surface and expose possible interests among your participants, among the funders, because there is always some kind of a hidden agenda that is risking failure. And it's interesting that you bring this question up, because yesterday I was being interviewed by 4 students who are doing a master's degree about Cyprus, about the peace process, and they wanted to interview me about opinions and so on. And I criticized the UN. And they were a bit surprised, because the UN has given us so much money, and it is the UN that actually developed the reunification plan, which was put to a referendum. And so they have never thought that somebody could criticize the UN, but they have missed the picture, because there are hidden agendas and hidden interests, sometimes not necessarily in a dirty way. I mean, sometimes are very, very simplistic things. Like, for example, one of the reasons the referendum in Cyprus failed, there are many, many reasons, but one of them is because the final version, the version 5, was edited by 200 experts that the UN and the American embassy brought from New York to edit it behind closed doors without any Cypriots involved. Whereas version 1, 2, 3, 4 were prepared by Cypriots. So they made it foreign even by those who wanted the Annan plan. I was one of them who developed 1, 2, 3, 4. I was angry when the 5th one came up without any input from Cypriots. You know, I mean, even these little things. And why have they done it? For a promotion. I mean, the people who were involved in that year, in that process, they all got promoted because they saw that as an opportunity. So sometimes it's things that are, you don't think about them. It's not necessarily a dirty agenda, but the critical systems heuristics helps you surface those hidden assumptions or boundaries, limitations.
Thank you so much. I have a lot to reflect on now. From
Where are you based? Where are you? Where are you?
I'm not based in Cyprus. I'm based in I'm in North America.
Ah, North America.
Yeah.
So it's early for you there.
Earlier, yes, yes. Thank you so much.
All right. You're welcome. So, shall we close it, Gerald? He's gone. We just no, he's here.
No, I'm here. Sorry, I lost sound and then had to log back in. I don't think Katerina, Sonia, Andrea, Jordan, or Mustafa, if you had any additional questions or comments, now would be a good time. Otherwise, we can go ahead and close the session.
Thanks. It was very informative.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for staying with us.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.